In our last video, we talked about marks of the Anglo-Saxon culture and the poetic form of elegies. So, common in Old English elegies is the expression of the transitoriness of the world and the human condition, the isolation of the narrator and bleak landscape focus on the inner world of exile where all men and women search for a new Lord or the one from whom they were separated. So, some considerations when reading The Wanderer is who's speaking? How many voices do we have? And there's been a lot of debate on how many speakers are really in this poem. My perspective, and from my reading of the poem, we have two speakers. We have a Christian narrator, um, or or translator, and then we have the pagan character of the wanderer. To kind of justify that interpretation or that reading of the text, I'd like for you guys to note the use of first person, the I, when the wanderer begins his story on line 5, no, line 8, excuse me, versus the opening of the first 7 lines where we have a third person point of view. What I've done is I've kind of broken up the structure of the poem based on who's doing the speaking. So we start with our Christian narrator in the first 7 lines, and then we go to the words of the wanderer or the thoughts of the wanderer in that first person. And then we have the narrator again who's going to kind of comment on what the wanderer's thoughts. Then we have the thoughts of the wanderer again, narrator's commentary, the wanderer, and then narrator's commentary. So keeping this structure in mind, and if we examine the context of the poem, the structure of the poem begins to make more sense. So the poem can be broken apart into two distinctive parts. The first part is this kind of historical, autobiographical narrative of the wanderer, and then this kind of wisdom, it transforms into this wisdom poem where he talks about what he's learned through his suffering. In other words, we get kind of the lesson or the moral that's presented through the narrator. So let's take a look at the title. And the title is important because it does a couple of things, or it's important to note for a couple of reasons. Originally, these poems, the 10th century poems that are found in the Book of Exeter, which I talked about on the last video, and the other Anglo-Saxon poems don't have formal titles. Really, it's only with our modern kind of translation do we get the title of the Wanderer. Just a kind of a fun fact, J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he translated a bunch of these Anglo-Saxon and medieval texts that we're going to be reading. He was a medievalist in his own right, a rather prominent one before becoming a fiction writer. But he offered some alternative titles to the poem that include An Exile, Alone, The Banished Man, and The Exile's Lament. However, the modern title, The Wanderer, is what stuck. And we get that title from the Anglo-Saxon word, and I'm going to butcher it, I know, because I can't pronounce things in Anglo-Saxon, but Erstrapa. And basically that translates into Earth Walker. What's it called? It is what that little Anglo-Saxon letter or character is, and it makes a TH sound. So we get the title Earth Walker, the Wanderer, And really, that phrase gives us our focal character. And the question is, who is the wanderer? And we find out through his story and his narrative that he is in exile. He's displaced. And he's lost his friends, family, and his Lord. He's alone and lonely, and for that he suffers. And the real focus here is on this idea of exile. And there are several ways to be exiled in an Anglo-Saxon society. One, you're disloyal to your lord, your king, or your husband, and you're banished, or you lose a battle or a war as a form of punishment. But most commonly, it's when a warrior outlives his lord and king and outlasts his fellow warriors. And that's what the kind of sense that we get from our wanderer. That's why he's in exile. He's old. He's outlived everyone. And for an Anglo-Saxon culture, an Anglo-Saxon society, a man without a lord is a man without an identity. And I think that's really kind of an interesting way to kind of read this poem, because not only is he looking for a new lord, a new clan, a new set of kinsmen, he's also trying to find himself. And that journey, as we'll see, really kind of transforms his views on life. So I want to focus a little bit on the author's state of mind. He says, and I'm looking at line 11, "In truth, I know that for any earl or warrior, an excellent virtue is to lock tight the treasure chest of one's heart." And this, I think it's interesting, this idea of treasure chest, like the things that you hold dear, the thoughts that are in your heart, all the good stuff. It is to lock it away. In other words, be stoic. Don't complain. It won't help or change what has or will happen, because fate or weird is fixed. What will happen will happen. What will be will be. And it's important to note that he's saying this, this idea that he's got to lock away himself because he won't talk about his suffering. And this becomes important later on. He keeps his thoughts to himself when he says, "I must hold the thoughts of my heart, though often wretched, bereft of homeland, far from kinfolk, bind them with fetters or chains. Since in days long past, with darkness of earth, I covered my gold friend." And gold friend, of course, means lord or king, someone who, I mean, that's kind of the role of the king. He honors those who are loyal to him. I fight for you, you're going to pay me. So the idea here is that he's closing himself off. He's got that stiff upper, that British stiff upper lip. And the truth is, he's really suffering. And once he's acquainted with pain, he understands how cruel a traveling companion sorrow is for someone with few friends. And really, the source of his suffering is because he's lost not only his lord, but he's lost his friends and his family. So looking at this in lines 36 through 56, when he's talking about burying his lord and how much he misses him, it really kind of emphasizes this Anglo-Saxon value of comitatus, or that loyalty or connection to a leader. And I think it also, not only is he grieving for the loss of his lord, he's grieving for the loss of his friends, the mead hall, his fellow warriors. And as a modern society, we can't really understand how important that is because we are surrounded by civilization and people. But for a medieval society, they really only had these tiny footholds of society. And if they're excluded or if it's gone, life is very, very bleak. Everything that is good in life is tied to a sense of a community, to the mead hall, the only place where order and stability really exists. So it kind of re-emphasizes that lack of stability that he has now and the importance of belonging to community, of having people of your own, really is to an Anglo-Saxon society. So when he's talking about his Lord, we get a sense, I mean, through his narrative, we get really all of his memories. And when we think about memories, right, and thinking of it kind of goes back to that idea that this is an elegy. This is where we kind of grieve for the loss of something or someone. And oftentimes that's called a lament. And part of the value of poetry is that it keeps people alive. You remember in the earlier video, I said that poetry is the only real hope for an afterlife, right? So memories and recounting them keep people alive. And the role of a poet, such as we have here, was akin to the role of the warrior. They are the keeper of the community's collective memory, and that's where they honor the dead. And for all intents and purposes, recounting these histories and these memories, it keeps a people alive. It keeps culture alive, and it's the only real way that a lost generation kind of survives. I mean, think about it when people in our own lives pass away. The way that we honor them, the way that we keep them alive is by talking about them. Not only is this kind of a way of keeping people alive, this recount of memory, it's also a reflection of how the Anglo-Saxons view time. And what we have here is the present is simply the point in which the past and future touch. So we get him remembering his past, thinking about his future, and what that means for the present. He has no clue of what the future holds, and those tensions between the past, the present, and the future, and where they touch, gives us the sense of being overwhelmed. And that, I think, kind of mirrors the inner thoughts and feelings of the wanderer. It is overwhelming to be on your own in so much agony, and being so lonely. Because there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. So memories of the past really dominate in the face of these future uncertainties. So I want to take a closer look at his memories and how he feels in lines 39 through 49. And keep in mind, this is coming from the narrator, not the wanderer. He says, often when sorrow and sleep together bind the poor lone dweller in their embrace, he dreams he clasps and that he kisses his liege lord again, lays head and hands on the Lord's knees, as he did long ago, enjoyed the gift-giving in days gone by. Then the warrior, friendless, awakens again, sees before him the fallow waves, seabirds on the water, spreading their wings, snow and hail falling, and sleet as well. Then the heart wounds grow heavier, sadness for dear ones, sorrow returns. Then, through his mind, pass memories of kinsmen. Joyfully he greets them, eagerly gazes. His fellow warriors, their floating spirits, fade on their way. They fail to bring much familiar talk. Trouble is renewed for any man who must often send his weary spirit over the waves' bed. So we get the sense here that there is this tension between the past, what he's lost, and the joy that it brings him, the present, not knowing where he's going and what lies ahead in the future. And then after we have this kind of reflection, we get a new direction, or there's this kind of shift to the poem. It turns to this image of an old man explaining what he's learned. And this is the wisdom part of the poem. The elegy transforms into this kind of wisdom poem, or a poetry that contains a lesson. And really, this is really significant because this journey of life, this isolation, this retrospective, this idea of an old man looking back on his life, is really responsible for the transformation of the mind of the wanderer. So he provides us with this kind of lesson, or this is what he has learned, and what he has learned is what it means to be wise. And it goes on for quite a bit of time, and I'm not going to read it word for word, but he's providing us with a model of how to be a wise man. And what he says, that a wise man must not be hasty in speech, be rash or fickle in battle, be greedy, nervous, or boastful. That's what a wise man ought not to be. Chances are you won't live long if that's the way you behave. And he also says that a wise man must also accept that riches fade, buildings fall, things in this earthly life don't last. Basically, life is hard, get a helmet, right? And really, he's saying that the only thing that doesn't end is your reputation, and God. God is the only real stability. And there's this motif that life is all about learning. So there's this emphasis on transformation, on evolution. People change, things change, and we really see that transformation both structurally in the poem, but also in the final words of the Wanderer. And the final words of the Wanderer, it does two things. It explains what happened to his people. He's the only sole survivor, and he's finally kind of opening up. But also, it presents this idea of that's found in Old English Anglo-Saxon literature, and that's the concept of ubi sunt. And ubi sunt is the Latin phrase for where are they now? And it's common when reflecting on earlier life and suffering. Is it to say, once I was happy in the mead hall. We used to party all night long. And what happened to those days? Where are they now? And if you think about it, you guys probably aren't old enough to, think about a high school reunion, but when I get together with friends that I went to high school with or college with, the common question is, well, what are they doing now? Have you heard from so and so? And traditionally in these poems, there'd be this kind of long list of where the king is at. Where's servants? Where's the guy who poured my mead? Where's my horse that I used to ride? And of course, the answer to this kind of where are they now question is that they're all dead. Okay, there's no one else left. He really emphasizes his meaning. And I want to take a look really quickly on this part of the text where he tells us what he's learned. Where are the seats of the fellowship? Where's the hall of festivity? Alas, bright beaker, alas, burnished warrior, alas, pride of princes. How the time has passed, gone under night helm as if it never was. A towering wall traced with serpent shapes endures instead of the dear warrior band. So places, monuments, buildings, they outlast people. Strength of ash spears destroyed warriors, slaughter greedy weapons, overwhelming fate, and storms beat against these stone-faced cliffs, snow descending seals upon the grounds, drumming of winter when darkness falls. Night shadows darken from the north send down fierce hailstorms in hatred of men. So he's really talking about he has lost all of these men because of war, because of battles. And his final, I think it's really important to notice his final commentary. He said, all is wretchedness in the realm of earth. Fate's work lays low the world under heaven. Here wealth is fleeting. Here friend is fleeting. Here family is fleeting. Here humankind is fleeting. All this resting place, earth, shall become empty. So he's basically arrived at the realization that life is impermanent. And that's the culmination of his wisdom, that nothing lasts, everything decays, the world is a dark and painful place. And with this, we kind of see the tensions between the pagan wanderer and the Christian narrator. For the pagan warrior, this notion that nothing lasts, carpe diem, get it while you can, versus this kind of idea. I mean, that's not what Christianity teaches us. And remember, this poem is written shortly after the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. And Christianity teaches us that we should be patient, we should restrain ourselves, we should suffer with grace. And here, I think that this is really showing those tensions, because for pagan, I mean, the question really here is why? Why do I have to suffer? Why do things die? And we as you know, people who have rooted, or a society that has been rooted time and time again in these Christian ideals. I mean, what happens when people die? You ask why. For an Anglo-Saxon, or for someone that has these kind of roots in pagan ideology, the answer to that question is, well, people die because that's the way it is. We suffer because that's our fate. That's weird, right? We don't really need an answer, because we accept that what will be, right? But for a Christian audience, or an upcoming Christian audience, we kind of want to answer those questions. And of course, the Christianity teaches us to be patient and to suffer. And this is really kind of like Job, the book of Job in the Bible. And really, to answer that question of what's the point, we get the final ending, or the ending part 2, where we switch back to the narrator's final thoughts. And he's reflecting, we have this Christian narrator reflecting on the life and the thoughts and words of the wanderer. And what he's saying basically is, here is a model of a wise man. Here, I have given you a portrait of someone who has had a lifetime to think about life. Someone who doesn't complain. He's not hasty of speech. He has learned from life. And if you do that, if you follow this example, if you model these characteristics of wisdom that I have laid out for you through this character of the wanderer, you will go to heaven. You will go to a place where there is stability. Although there's no stability on earth, God, that is the only stability one person has. So look to him and you'll go to heaven. Suffer with grace and courage. And this really appeals to the Anglo-Saxons because life was so uncertain. And living until you're 40, right, would be old. And reaching that kind of old age is both a blessing and a curse. So, which brings me to kind of this. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of old age and the imagery and the symbolism. And one of the things that you notice about the imagery and kind of the mood that we have here, everything is cold, everything is in the winter, and winter often symbolize, I mean, we've got this very old wanderer. He has reached the ripe old age, and winter oftentimes symbolizes the end of life, when everything is cold and everything is harsh. And in some ways, old age is a form of exile. But he's talking about, the poet and the wanderer is talking about his journey through imagery of the seasons and the weather, which often indicate cycles of change or cycles of life. And we go from talking about his youth or his glory days that are kind of characterized by warmth and fire, this kind of civilization of the mead hall and kinship, to this state of old age where everything is dark, cold, and snowy, and there's this sense of isolation and uncertainty. And I guess that this is really the embodiment of the failure of human relationships and the failure of earthly life. So I guess that there are kind of two views of life presented through this poem. When we are young, we seek comfort in people, in society, in our place with our Lord. And then people die, we see how the world really works. We get some experience, and that leads to suffering. And suffering is really the path to truth. And faith in the Lord provides that permanent sense of security. So really, this is talked a little bit longer than I had intended to, but in a nutshell, we see a lot of these elements of the Anglo-Saxon culture in this very, I guess it's a little bit of a short poem, in this poem, and on a first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, but it's kind of paradoxically simple. So take that for what you will. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about this poem through the discussion boards. Let me know if you have any questions, and wander on.